Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Welcome to part 2 of working on my jade forest. This will be my last video of 2023 and the last video of season 10 of the Bonsai Zone. Before I get started on today's work, I just want to thank everyone for watching the Bonsai Zone. It's been a lot of fun over the last 10 years. I've met all kinds of cool people, and I hope the community continues to grow in the future. Today I'm going to be scarring up the trunks on the jades to create some interest on the trunks and make them look more like the giant African Baobab tree. In part 1 of the series, I mentioned that jades, it's difficult to establish a scale value for the trees because they're kind of unusual and you don't really see them in nature. They don't look like a typical tree. So sometimes placing figurines in the planting, you can see I have a person leaning against the tree here, and that's one scale value for the tree. It gives a size to the tree. I'll try out some other ideas, and you can see how by replacing this person with something else changes the scale value of the tree. So let's try some zebras next. So there's one zebra, and I'll put the baby zebra back here. So you can see how that changes the planting. I think it makes the trees look a little taller and a little larger looking. So let's try something else now. Here's an elephant if I can fit it in here. Whoa, it's a tight fit. Maybe there. Don't crush my jades. So there's an elephant in the planting. And again, that changes the scale value of the trees. I think it makes the trees look even larger. Next, I'll try a giraffe. So there's a giraffe nibbling away at the leaves in the upper canopy. I'll try a Land Rover next. So put that in there. And again, that changes the value, the scale value. It makes the trees look super giant. Last, I'll try some rocks. So I'll get some red rocks and I'll put a pile of rocks at the base of the tree here. And you can see that adds a landscape element that also gives a scale value to the tree. It helps establish a scale. And this, with the rocks, it's still kind of ambiguous how big the tree is, but it adds a bit of detail that you can relate to. And it just gives the trees a certain size. I find with most of my trees, as the tree develops, it gets better branching, the trunk matures, the bark, that they develop their own scale value. So you don't need a figurine beside it or any rocks or anything. It just kind of gives its own size to the tree. And it's kind of nice when it gets to that point where it's miniaturized enough that a person looking at it can say, yeah, a person would be about this size. So I think that's part of the magic of bonsai, is to have the tree reduced to a miniature form where a person can imagine themselves standing under the tree. I'm going to begin scarring up the trunks on the jades today, and it's a process that takes a long time. You make some initial scars, let them heal, add more scars between your original scars, let those heal, and over the years, maybe 2 or 3 years, you finally end up with a really nice textured trunk that looks more miniature and more like a baobab tree. To make the scars on the trunk, I just use the pointy end of scissors and I put vertical scars up the trunk, and I'll make some light and some deeper, and I'll see how it heals. I don't want to scar it up too much at first because I don't want to risk killing the tree. But I do want to make the start of some scarring on the trunk. So here I go. I'm just going to remove my rocks and then I'll begin. So I'm going to start at the base of the tree. I'll grab the trunk and just scar upward, digging into that fleshy layer on the trunk. This scarring also reduces the ringed appearance of jades. You can see the segmented rings. As jades get older, these rings sometimes disappear, but not always. Sometimes they get, even more pronounced. So the scarring kind of helps make the trunk look more like a baobab with a more of a traditional trunk and some texture on it, so it's not smooth. And I'll go right up into the branches here. So I think that's good for my first scar. Just rub the bark off. So you can see the green fleshy layer underneath, and in time that just skins over and turns the same color as the bark, and you get kind of a cool texture on the trunk of your jade. Here goes scar number 2. I'm going to space it away. And then the next time I scar up the trunk, I will scar between these scars, and eventually you'll get that sort of cool scarring all over the trunk. It takes time. I've done it on my Portulacaria afras quite successfully, and I did it on another jade, but that one died from mealybugs, so I was kind of sad to lose that tree. The trunk was looking really good on it. So there's scar number 2. I'll rotate the tree around now and start scar number 3 on the side here. It's a little harder to get in here, but I can do it, I think. If I come in like this. And the scars, they don't have to be, perfect. They just have to be sort of go deeper in some sections. They don't even have to be straight. They can be crooked. As long as you get some scarring happening so the tree calluses over and it starts to get some interest in the trunk. Now, old jades will get a flaky bark on them. But it takes many, many years. Like, we're talking probably 40 years or more. I'll rotate around to the back now and start scar number 4 coming up. I think that's good. And then I'll add one more to this side. So here I go. So jades have quite a thick, fleshy outer layer, but there is a woody part on the interior of the trunk and branches. And I'll show you a close-up of that. So I think that's good. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scars on it. Here's a look at that scarring. So I didn't go too deep. And up top you can see here's a branch that I cut off, and you can see the woody core in there and then the fleshy outer layer. As an experiment, I'll do some scarring on some of the younger trees just out front to see how they do. If I can get in here. Like like this. There's one, and I'll do this back tree. And I'll just do one scar on these and just see how they do. These are quite young trees. So we'll see if they heal over the same as the older parts of this tree here. So I think that's good. I think everything's scarred up nicely. And as I said, the next time I go to scar it, I'll go in between these scars. And then the next time I'll go in between those spaces. So eventually the whole trunk is full of kind of scar tissue. From previous experiments on jades, I find the scars do heal over and they tend to smooth out. But the scar is always visible. It creates an interesting texture on the trunk. Very reminiscent of the Baobab tree. The last work I'm going to do on the jades is I'm going to remove some of the moss from around the base of the tree. I don't want it holding moisture around the trunk line. Now this moss, the reason I've got moss on the surface of this soil is that it's in the basement, this tree, and it's quite humid. So even though I don't water the soil much, the moss tends to do okay. It lives even though the soil is dry, and it's just because the air is humid. And you'll find that in greenhouses that, you know, you can have a nice lush layer of moss on the surface of the soil, but the soil itself can be quite bone dry, especially if you're misting the trees. It keeps the moss on the surface nice and green and healthy looking, and yet the soil underneath can be really, really dry. So growing succulents in a humid environment is kind of nice because, you know, the humidity's up top near the surface of the soil. You get a lot of good surface roots forming, and you can keep moss on the trees and have dry soil and keep the trees healthy. In a drier environment, it's almost impossible to grow moss. So I think that's good around the base of the tree. It's kind of cleared of any moss. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how these scars heal. Time will tell. I finished the work on my jade forest for today. There'll be much more work coming in the future as the trees grow and mature. So it should be quite fun trying to develop a really cool looking Baobab style jade. It's time now for today's updates. It's been rainy weather over Christmas this year, and today it's starting to snow. The first update for today is the Porsche 911 Targa 1970. So if you notice, it is in the air. So we've got 4 jack stands under it. It's lifted off the ground. All the wheels are off the ground. And the reason for that is, well, there's a couple of reasons. The number one reason is we want to drop the engine out the bottom of the car and work on the engine separately. It's a little easier to work on the engine when it's not in the engine compartment. We also want to clear out the engine compartment so we can paint it all up nice. And underneath the car, we've got some body work to do under here. There's some holes to weld up and just clean it all up and make it look really nice. So the goal for this car is to worry about all the outer cosmetic details later. It's to get the car on the road and running. So Julian's been working away at cleaning up the floors. So we've got to get the holes welded up, get it all safe and secure. So there's lots of work to go on it. I think it'll be maybe a multi-year project. But we'll work away at it and we'll do all the work ourselves if possible. Next, we're heading into the plant room for updates on the tropical trees. So here we go. Here we are in the plant room. Time for plant room updates. So let's start with an update to my LED light here. So a spider has spun a web on the light and you can see all the insects it's caught. I think those are those gnats. So that's kind of nice. Who needs those yellow sticky strips when you've got spiders in the room? Let's start the updates with my bloodwood tree here. I gave this a severe root pruning and you can see it's recovered and growing really, really well. Down here is my kapok tree or kapok, and I also did a severe root pruning on this, and so far the leaves are still hanging in there and I think I see some buds swelling on it. So I think it's going to survive just fine. So far, both it and the cuttings are doing well. Over here is the Morton Bay Ficus with the Jurassic Park Jeep beside it, because these trees are featured in the movie Jurassic Park. So it's doing really well after its repotting. It's got new leaves coming on it. Everything is looking really good and healthy on the tree. Next down here we have my mini bonsai that I created recently. So I have the parrot's beak from Kale there. It's doing really well. And I have some ficus. I think they're tiger bark. And they're both doing well. Next over here is an update to the Frankenficus. Did it survive? Yes, it did. So here is the top of the tree now. So you can see all the new growth coming out from the top. The branches are also doing well. Here's the one branch to the right hand side, and the one to the left is also doing well. The one to the left is really long, but now I'm starting to get back budding down the branch, so I can shorten that and make the tree more compact. I'm also getting new shoots coming out on the trunk in various places, so I think that'll just increase as the plant gains vigor. I'll get all kinds of back budding on it, which is nice for future branch selection. The Taprome Temple continues to push out roots. It's quite amazing, actually. I was just looking back at the video where I put this all together, and wow, it's really, really grown roots since then. They're coming out all over the place, which is good because I have lots of roots to choose from then if I need to prune away some in the future, kind of keeping my flowing roots and maybe pruning away some of the ones that aren't looking so good. So the escape root on here, if we look over this side, right down here there was a vigorous root that grew across the pot and down to the bench, and then it grew out the front of the planting to down here, and it's going down, down, down. If I can show you it down there by the cords, it's growing down and it's almost touched the ground or the floor. So it's really, really vigorous, that escape root. I have another escape root over here that's grown out of the pot, and you can see it's also growing down towards the floor. And there's a lot of roots coming off of it. So it's just amazing, you know, the amount of roots these Bert Davy ficus produce. They are a strangler fig, so that's what they do best, is grow roots down. So seeds germinate in the upper canopies of trees in the moss, and then they send out roots and they thicken up, and then eventually they take over the original tree. And that's why they call them strangler figs, because that's what they do. So here's some of the roots off the largest tree here. There's some aerial roots growing alongside the temple, down into the moss. They've reached the soil surface down here. Yeah, so an amazing amount of roots. And you can also see the top growth. The original tree here, or the original foliage on this tree, is really nice looking. Large leaves, but they can be reduced. And then this is all new growth on the largest tree here. has smaller leaves. It's right under the light, so it stays quite compact. But yeah, it's starting to turn into a real jungle scene. It's getting overgrown. So that'll be fun pruning it up, styling the trees in the future. But for now, I'm just letting them grow because my main goal is to develop all these roots. And it is doing it. So that is great to see. If it didn't grow any more roots after today, I think I have enough roots to develop the planting into the future. But I'm sure keeping it humid, it'll grow lots and lots more roots. Over here is my very first bonsai, my Ficus microcarpa that I grew from a seed. And you can see it's doing well. It's getting a few aerial roots coming off the trunk, not a whole lot. But it's doing well, it looks healthy, it's growing. That's all you can ask for. Beside it is Ficus Fancy. It's in between the lights here, so it's not growing quite as strongly, but it's still doing really well. And it's generating all kinds of new aerial roots coming off of the trunk too, which is nice to see. Beside that is my Schefflera banyan style planting. It's also doing really well. It's getting a lot of aerial roots. I don't know if you can see them in there, but yeah, that's a look underneath. Yeah, it looks healthy. It's doing well. My Vietnam style ficus here in the 3D printed pot is also doing well. It's getting lots of foliage up top. So it's getting a few aerial roots also. Yeah, so that will need a pruning eventually. I'm going to let it grow a little more first. The silk floss trees here, I did a big chop on them. Right here, they're doing quite well. They've grown in nicely. Over here is the $50 challenge tree. I took a large trunk off it recently. It's doing well. It's getting some new growth on it. So far, the cutting is still green. So it'll be interesting to see if that roots. Here are my desert rose. So some of the trees are dormant for the winter. They've lost their leaves. Other ones are staying quite green and healthy looking. So I'm not sure why some have lost their leaves and some haven't, but they're all healthy. Over here I have an orchid. This is my only orchid. It was given to me by someone and it's flowering, which is kind of cool. I can't show you the front of the flower, but it's there. Here's my olive tree that I repotted fairly recently. It's got a lot of growth on it. It shouldn't be growing this time of year. It should be cool, but I warmed it up after repotting just to get the roots established. And I'll probably cool it down again for the winter. I'll put it in the basement, keeping it above freezing. Just to cool it down, give it a rest period, and then hopefully in spring it'll resume growing. Over here is my lychee tree. This was given to me by Zen. It was started from a seed. And it's developing quite nicely. The trunk's thickening up. It'll need pruning soon. Behind that is my dracaenas that I started from seeds, and they're growing really well. Behind that is jackfruit, and it's doing okay. I wouldn't say it's super vigorous or anything, but it's hanging in there. Here is my fiddle leaf ficus. You can see it looks really healthy. There's tons of roots growing over the edge of the pot. The trunk is thickening up nicely. It's getting some flare at the base. Yeah, I think that's going to be a really cool bonsai in the future. I'll just keep working on it, letting it get a little larger each year. And keep working on the leaves, reducing the leaves. You know, the more branches you get, the smaller the leaves will get. Yeah, I'll keep working away at it. What else? The rubber trees are doing okay in here. No great growth on them, but they're healthy looking. They did push out, you know, some new growth on them when I moved them into the plant room here. Since then, they've just been kind of sitting there. I think they're waiting for, spring. Behind that is my Chinese village penjing. It's kind of hard to get at. I haven't really done much with it. I can't really see it that well, but it seems to be doing okay. A lot of my tiger bark ficus have lost a lot of leaves. You can see the one from the workshop in the corner over here. It looks healthy. I think it's just, the conditions. When I moved them into the plant room, they were nice and healthy and full of leaves, and now they're kind of starting to lose them, but the growing tips are all green, so I think it's just maybe getting used to the lower light levels in here. Same with my my crown of thorns. It kind of defoliated a bit once I brought it into the plant room, but there's lots of new growth coming on it now. The aloe bonsai, which is in here somewhere, it's doing all right. It got a lot of new aerial roots on it once I moved it into the plant room here. Behind that is the money tree. It's doing all right too. It's got a lot of new growth on it. I would say that 90% of the trees are doing really well in the plant room here, but there are a few that aren't doing so well. In the back corner here is my Premna, and it kind of defoliated itself, which is all right. It still looks healthy and alive, and there's new shoots growing in on it, but it didn't do that last year, so I'm a little concerned. I'm careful with the watering. It's got good light back there, but it's a little defoliated at the moment, so we'll see how that does. The other one that's concerning me is my Ficus religiosa, the big one. So when I brought it in here, it was looking good. I did get some branch dieback on it last year, and I'm still getting that. So this branch here had some figs on it, and it was looking really good, and then the figs dried up and fell off, and then the leaves started falling off, so I think I've lost this branch here. It's just drying up. And then the other branch over here, it's still got growing tips that are green on it, but it kind of defoliated and is looking weak. So I'm kind of concerned. The main trunk line looks good. I mean, it's not bursting in health, but at least, it's got some new growth on it. The leaves are nice and green and healthy, but I don't know what's going on with those branches dying back. I've been really careful with the water and keeping it moist at all times. It's in, a nice warm, humid room here. It's got good light, so I don't know what's going on. My Brazilian rain tree here, it's also a bit defoliated at the moment. There's all kinds of buds on the branches, so I think it's just the transition to the plant room here. I think it's fine. I mean, they're very tough trees. I'm sure once it gets outdoors in the summer, it'll fill in quite nicely. Over here is my banyan tree, my Ficus bengalensis, and it's doing really awesome. It's I did a hard prune on it. You can see the big chop at the top, and then it's developed all these lower branches. It was just a bare trunk before. I did prune off the two tallest shoots of the new branches. They were getting too vigorous, and I wanted to keep the lower branches alive also. So that'll be fun developing this into a banyan style tree. I recently repotted this Ficus microcarpa and did some root carving, and it's got new growth coming in on it, so it survived the repotting quite well. It's doing well. Back in the corner here is my willow leaf ficus that I pruned up recently, and it started getting a lot of new growth in, but it's not real vigorous. I don't think it likes the conditions it's in. I think it doesn't quite get enough light back there, but it's doing okay. The Norfolk Island pines back there are doing fine. My powder puff tree here, I pruned this up recently, and it's just absolutely exploded in growth. It's so thick, the growth, that you can't see the branch structure anymore. Yeah, it's quite amazing. Keeping your tropical trees is always a challenge in winter. long winters here, and you know, they're all in a confined space where insects can spread easily. So yeah, you just do the best you can and hope that your trees survive until spring comes. Underneath the plant room in the basement here, everything is doing very, very well. You can see my Portulacaria afra Baobab styles are looking nice and healthy. Even though it's cool down here, they continue to grow. The lemon tree back here is looking good. My bougainvillea is hanging in there. They like a cool period in winter. What else? Oh, the Sarissa is doing well. It's actually growing a bit down here. So a bunch of new shoots coming up. Yeah, everything's doing really well down here. It's everything's fairly dormant, so I don't expect a lot of growth, but it is. My Jade, the one from Connor, the old one, it's also a Baobab style. You can see it's filling in quite nicely up top there. My guava tree here, it's kind of losing its leaves. It's a bit cool for it, but once that warms up, it should recover. The Chinese elm, it's growing a little bit down here. Even though it's cool, it's got a few new shoots on it. But yeah, everything's doing quite well. All my miniatures down here are looking good. These jades, they seem to grow really well in cool weather. I don't know what it is. My ones upstairs are kind of defoliated. They're not liking it, but the ones down here in the cool basement, they're doing really well. I'm not sure why that is, but they seem to like the cool conditions. Yeah, so that is it for the updates for today for season 10 and 2023. That is all for season 10 of the Bonsai Zone. I hope everyone has a great 2024. I hope both you and your trees do well. That's all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.